Turn the car around. Now. My husband's voice was barely above a whisper, but it sliced through the hum of the tires and the soft country radio. His face had gone pale, his knuckles tight around the armrest. I glanced at him, confused. What are you talking about? We're almost there. Please, he said, his eyes locked on mine. Just turn around. Something in his expression, fear, sorrow, maybe both, made my stomach knot. I didn't ask again. I flicked on the blinker, turned the wheel, and drove us away from the reunion that should have been ordinary, but wasn't. I've always been the one who smooths the wrinkles, both in clothes and in people. My mornings are quiet, deliberate. I wake before dawn, not because I need to, but because the silence belongs to me. That morning was no different. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, the tiles cool against my skin. The kettle hissed as it warmed, and the faint scent of coffee grounds drifted up when I opened the jar. I've learned to treasure these little rituals. Coffee, sunlight creeping through thin curtains, the steady rhythm of breathing before the day begins. My husband, Daniel, is the opposite. He sleeps until the last possible moment, rolling over with a groan when the alarm rings. When I set his mug of coffee on the nightstand, he mumbles thanks without opening his eyes. It's our unspoken rhythm, small gestures stitched into years of marriage. We live in a modest house, nothing fancy, but every corner carries a story. The scuff on the hallway wall from moving in a bookshelf. The chip in the kitchen counter where Daniel once dropped a plate. These imperfections don't bother me, they anchor me. At work, I carry a different rhythm. I teach literature at the local high school, a job that's both exhausting and strangely comforting. The smell of chalk, the scratch of pens across paper, the shuffle of restless feet. It all blends into a background hum I've grown used to. My classroom walls are lined with faded posters of writers, their faces watching over us like silent witnesses. I take pride in the way I make stories come alive for my students. When they lean forward, eyes wide, as I describe a scene from Dickens or Morrison, I feel a quiet triumph. Not loud, not boastful, just steady proof that I'm doing something meaningful. That morning, though, even as I moved through the familiar motions, something restless stirred in me. The reunion loomed. My parents had insisted on hosting it this year. It'll be good for everyone to be together, my mother had said over the phone, her tone bright, almost rehearsed. Reunions were complicated for me. On the surface, we were the picture of a close family, laughter, food, photos framed neatly on walls. But underneath, there was always a current of something unspoken. A glance held too long, a silence stretched too thin. Daniel knew this. He'd seen how tense I became in the days leading up to gatherings. He never pushed, never demanded explanations. Instead, he would reach for my hand under the dinner table, or brush his thumb over my knuckles when the silence got heavy. That was his way of telling me I wasn't alone. On the drive that day, the landscape rolled by in soft greens and dusty browns. The sun flashed between trees, casting quick shadows across the dashboard. Daniel sat unusually quiet, his gaze fixed out the window. I assumed he was tired, maybe lost in thought. I remember thinking, this will be fine. I can handle one more reunion. I can smile, ask polite questions, pretend the cracks aren't there. I didn't know then that Daniel's silence wasn't sleepiness. It was recognition. That pale look on his face, the whisper that made me turn the car around. Those were the first signs that the reunion would unearth truths I'd spent years refusing to see. Looking back, the warning signs had always been there. But I was raised to ignore what was inconvenient, to smile instead of question. My parents, especially my mother, prized appearances above all else. When I was a child, she would straighten my dress collar before church, press a finger to my lips and whisper, "Smile, sweetheart. People are watching." I learned early that discomfort, even pain, was less important than the illusion of harmony. As I grew older, I carried that lesson like a second skin. Even when my brother, Michael, slipped my ideas into conversations and passed them off as his own, I laughed it off. Even when my parents praised him for being so responsible and insightful, I said nothing. What was the point? Confrontation only soured the air, and my mother's sharp glance was enough to silence me. The first deep cut came when I was 22. I'd worked for months on a short story competition. It was the first time I felt proud of my writing, Raw, personal, something that belonged entirely to me. I left the draft printed on the desk one afternoon while visiting home. A week later, at dinner, Michael casually mentioned he had entered a story competition. His words mirrored mine. His title was mine. My parents clapped him on the back, proud smiles all around. I sat frozen, the taste of roast beef heavy in my mouth. I never told them it was mine. Michael won second place. My parents framed his certificate. I swallowed the betrayal, told myself it was just one story, one mistake. But it carved a hollow space inside me where trust should have been. Years later, when I finished my master's degree, I expected at least a flicker of pride from them. I remember walking into the kitchen, diploma still warm in its tube, ready to show them. My mother barely glanced up from chopping carrots. "That's nice, dear," she said, before turning to ask Michael about his new job at the bank. He hadn't even started yet, but their attention shifted to him as though my achievement had been a passing breeze. Daniel saw the hurt I carried after that. He was just my boyfriend then, sitting beside me in the car outside my parents' house. I remember his hand brushing mine, grounding me. "You don't have to keep proving yourself to them," he said softly. "You're enough as you are." I wanted to believe him, but part of me still craved their recognition. The final betrayal, though, was financial, and it cut deeper than words. After my grandmother died, I found out that she had left me a small inheritance. Nothing life-changing, but enough to help with the down payment on our house. I learned about it not from my parents, but from a letter misdelivered to our address. When I confronted my mother, her face didn't even flicker with guilt. "It made more sense for Michael to have it," she said, as if discussing groceries. "He has bigger responsibilities than you. You're fine, you have Daniel." I stood there, stunned, the letter trembling in my hand. She had rerouted my grandmother's gift without even asking me. It wasn't about the money. It was about the choice, the assumption that my needs were secondary, that my voice didn't matter. I wanted to scream. Instead, I left their house that night with Daniel's arm around me, my throat raw from silence. After that, I began dreading reunions more. Each one was another performance. Michael being praised for ordinary things, my parents' polite disinterest in my life. They never insulted me directly, but the indifference, the quiet erasure, was worse. By the time Daniel whispered for me to turn the car around, I had already built years of armor. What I didn't realize was that my husband had seen something in my parents' eyes that I had trained myself not to see. Something sharper, uglier. He wasn't just saving me from an uncomfortable dinner. He was saving me from a truth I wasn't ready to face, that the family I longed to belong to had been betraying me, piece by piece, for as long as I could remember. The day of the reunion was supposed to be ordinary. Food, laughter, the usual lopsided photos in my parents' garden. But from the moment we turned onto the long gravel drive, Daniel's posture stiffened. I noticed it first in the way his fingers drummed against his leg, a restless rhythm. Then his breath grew shallow, his gaze fixed on the house as if he were bracing for impact. "What's wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice light, though my stomach tightened. He shook his head. "Nothing. Just long day." But when the house came into view, I saw his face pale. That's when he whispered the words that changed everything. "Turn the car around." Now, I didn't argue. I obeyed, my hands trembling on the steering wheel as I steered us back toward the road. The silence between us was heavy, broken only by the crunch of tires on gravel. When we reached the main road, I pulled over. My heart was pounding. "Daniel, what's going on? Why are you acting like this?" He hesitated, his jaw tight. "I saw something. In the window." "In the window?" He nodded, his eyes still locked on the rearview mirror, as if afraid we were being followed. "Your parents, Michael. They were gathered in the dining room. I swear they were looking at papers, bank documents. And when they saw our car pull in, they froze. Like they weren't expecting us yet." I frowned. "So what? Maybe they were just—" "No," he cut in sharply. Then his voice softened. "They look guilty. I've seen that look before. At work, when someone's hiding numbers. They weren't preparing for a reunion, love. They were plotting something." A chill ran down my arms. It sounded paranoid, but deep down I knew Daniel wasn't the type to exaggerate. He was steady, logical. If he said he saw guilt, he had seen guilt. Still, I clung to denial. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe, think back, Daniel interrupted gently. The inheritance. The way they always cut you out. Doesn't it feel like pieces of something bigger? I wanted to dismiss him, but his words burrowed into the cracks already inside me. The image of my parents leaning over documents, startled like children caught stealing, replayed in my mind. For the rest of the drive home, silence wrapped around us. Daniel didn't press, but I could feel his worry pulsing beside me. That night, lying awake beside him, I stared at the ceiling, my chest heavy. Old wounds throbbed with new life. Were they hiding something else? Something bigger than I'd let myself believe? The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. We missed you yesterday. Everyone asked about you. Hope Daniel is feeling better. The casual tone stung. No mention of disappointment, no warmth. Just a perfunctory line, as though I were a distant relative instead of a daughter. Later that week, the truth began to surface. I stopped by the library after work, a neutral place to think. As I wandered between shelves, I spotted a familiar figure near the study tables, Michael. He hadn't seen me. He was on the phone, his voice hushed but urgent. Yes, it's almost done, he whispered. The accounts will be cleared by next month. She doesn't need to know. They trust me with it. I froze, books forgotten in my hands. She doesn't need to know. Was he talking about me? My skin prickled. I stepped back before he could notice me, my heart slamming in my chest. That night, I told Daniel what I'd heard. He didn't look surprised. This is it, he said quietly. This is what they've been keeping from you. It's not just favoritism anymore. It's something financial, maybe bigger than the inheritance. I wanted to deny it again, but the words I'd overheard were too sharp, too damning. The reunion, the frozen faces at the window, it all clicked into place. Something was happening behind my back. Something that involved my family, my name, my future. And for the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of anger. Not the kind that passes like a storm cloud, but the kind that settles deep, steady, undeniable. Daniel took my hand. You don't have to fight this alone. But if you want to know the truth, we'll find it. Together. I nodded, my throat tight. The years of silence, of smiling through betrayal, were collapsing under the weight of a new resolve. This time, I wasn't going to turn the car around and drive away. This time, I was going to uncover exactly what they were hiding. Sleep abandoned me in the days that followed. I would lie awake beside Daniel, the ceiling fan whirring its steady circle, shadows stretching across the walls. My body was tired, but my mind ran like an engine I couldn't switch off. Michael's voice haunted me. She doesn't need to know. I replayed it again and again, searching for another interpretation. Maybe he was talking about someone else. Maybe it was about work. But deep down I knew. I had always known my parents kept secrets from me, shaped narratives in ways that favored Michael, but this was different. This wasn't indifference, it was exclusion. A deliberate decision to erase me. I sat at the kitchen table late into the night, fingers curled around a mug gone cold. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Daniel would find me there sometimes, his hair mussed from sleep. He never scolded me, never told me to come back to bed. He would just sit down across from me, take the mug from my hands, and hold them until the trembling eased. Why does it hurt so much? I whispered once, my voice cracking. Because it's not just money or recognition, he said gently. It's love. The love you deserved but never got. That's the wound. His words sliced clean through me. He was right. It wasn't about inheritance or family photos. It was about being chosen last, always. About being invisible in the one place where I should have mattered most. One night, after tossing in bed until dawn, I pulled out an old box from the closet. It was full of letters, journals, scraps of my younger self. I leafed through pages filled with careful handwriting, each one carrying a quiet plea, notice me, love me, see me. I found the letter from my grandmother, written before she passed. Her script was shaky but still firm. I want you to have this. For your future, for the life you're building. Don't let anyone take it from you. Reading it again, I felt the air rush from my lungs. She had seen me. She had chosen me. And my parents had stolen that gift as if it were theirs to decide. Anger rose hot and sharp. Not the wild, flailing anger I'd seen in others, but something deeper, controlled, focused. For the first time, I wanted to do more than endure. I wanted to fight back. Daniel noticed the change. One morning, as I pulled on my coat for work, he watched me with quiet eyes. "You're different," he said. "How?" "You're standing taller." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "I think you're ready." Ready. The word settled in my chest. That evening, I sat at the desk with a blank notebook. I wrote one word at the top: truth. Not revenge. Not punishment. Just truth. Because if there was one thing my parents had taught me, it was how destructive lies could be. The lies of omission, of preference, of silence. But this time, I wouldn't swallow it. The next weeks blurred into a strange rhythm. Days at school, nights at the kitchen table. Daniel helped me piece together timelines, documents, fragments of overheard conversations. Every discovery lit a small flame inside me, even when exhaustion pressed heavy on my shoulders. I began to notice how differently I carried myself. At school, I didn't shrink when colleagues interrupted me. At home, I didn't apologize for being upset. In mirrors, I saw not just the tired lines under my eyes but also a new steadiness in my jaw. The insomnia didn't vanish, but it changed. Instead of pacing in despair, I paced in determination. Instead of asking why me, I asked what next. And for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of quiet power, like I had been holding my breath for decades and was finally learning how to exhale. I didn't know yet how deep their betrayal ran, or what exactly they were hiding. But I knew this. I was going to uncover it, piece by piece. And when the time came, I would make sure the truth saw daylight, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how ugly. The first step was the hardest, deciding where to look. My family was meticulous about keeping up appearances, but they weren't flawless. If Michael had been sloppy enough to talk in a library, maybe there were other loose threads waiting to be pulled. I began with my grandmother's will. The letter she'd written me was proof she had intended something specific, but I needed more. So, on a gray Saturday morning, I drove to the courthouse archives. The building smelled of dust and disinfectant, the kind of place where secrets waited quietly behind drawers of yellowing paper. I requested the probate records under her name. The clerk, a tired man with rimless glasses, handed me a file with little ceremony. I carried it to a corner desk, my hands trembling. Inside, I found what I was looking for, a line item listing me as a beneficiary. A modest sum, yes, but clearly marked. And then, another page, an amendment filed just weeks later, naming Michael as the sole recipient. The signature looked shaky, uneven. My throat tightened. My grandmother had been bedridden at that time. I remembered visiting her, her hands frail, her words slurred. She could barely hold a pen. So how had she signed a legal document? I photocopied the pages, my fingers cold as I slipped them into a folder. It wasn't proof of forgery, not yet, but it was the first brick in the wall. When I showed Daniel, he exhaled slowly. "This is big. But if you push too hard too fast, they'll close ranks. You need more. You need something undeniable." He was right. My family had a way of twisting narratives, making me seem dramatic or unreliable. If I confronted them now, they'd dismiss me, tell me I was imagining things, just as they always had. So I kept quiet. And I kept digging. The setbacks came quickly. I tried contacting the lawyer who had handled the amendment, but his office said he'd retired 2 years ago. The new staff promised to look into it, but weeks passed without a word. I asked an old neighbor who used to visit my grandmother if she remembered anything unusual. She frowned, then shrugged. "Your brother was always there. He handled everything. Your parents said you were busy with school." I thought that was the arrangement. Busy with school. That familiar ache returned. My parents had painted me as absent, careless, while they quietly rewrote my history. One night, exhausted from dead ends, I slammed the folder shut. "It's useless," I muttered. "They're too careful. I'll never have enough." Daniel reached across the table, steadying my hands. "You're not useless. You're uncovering decades of deceit. That takes time." But patience was hard. Each failed lead felt like a confirmation of my invisibility. Then, unexpectedly, a small crack appeared. At school, I overheard two parents chatting while waiting for their children. One mentioned Michael's name. My ears perked. "He's helping your folks with the accounts, right?" one said. "Smart move, putting everything under his management." "Everything?" I interrupted too quickly. The women blinked at me, surprised. "From what I heard," the first woman said, lowering her voice, "he's handling the trust. Your grandmother's estate, the house, some investments. Must be a relief, having someone so responsible." Responsible? The word made me want to laugh and scream at once. That night, I searched public records online. After hours of scrolling, I found it. Property filings showing my parents' house had been quietly transferred into Michael's name. Not jointly. Solely. I stared at the screen, my chest tight. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They were already erasing me from the family legacy entirely. I printed the records, adding them to my folder. Each page was another piece of the puzzle, but the picture growing clearer was one I didn't want to see. The stress began to take its toll. I snapped at students for small mistakes, forgot to eat lunch, misplaced my keys twice in 1 week. At night, I dreamed of my mother's cold eyes, of Michael's smirk, of signatures written by shaking hands. One evening, Daniel found me crying in the bathroom, my shoulders shaking silently. He knelt beside me, his voice steady. "You don't have to carry this alone." "I feel like I'm drowning," I whispered. "Every time I think I've found solid ground, it slips away. And I keep hearing their voices, telling me I'm imagining it, that I'm too sensitive. What if I'm wrong?" He squeezed my hand. "Listen to me. You are not wrong. You've been gaslit your whole life into doubting yourself. But the facts don't lie. You have them. Keep going." His faith became my anchor. Slowly, momentum built again. I reached out to an old family friend, Mr. Collins, who used to handle bookkeeping for the local bank where Michael now worked. Over tea in his cluttered kitchen, he sighed heavily. "Your grandmother trusted you, you know. She told me once she wanted you to have something of your own. But your parents, well, they leaned on Michael. They always did. And when papers came through, I noticed irregularities." Irregularities. My pulse quickened. Dates that didn't match. Signatures that looked traced. I didn't say anything then. I didn't want to be in the middle of family business. But if you're asking, yes. Something wasn't right. He rummaged through a drawer, pulling out an old ledger. "I can't give you copies. It's not my place. But I can tell you where to look." He scribbled down names of accounts, dates of transfers. My hands shook as I tucked the note into my folder. For weeks, I pieced everything together. Probate records, property filings, whispered confirmations. The folder grew thick, heavy as a brick. Yet every step forward seemed to invite another obstacle. The bank refused to release documents without proof of my legal interest. The retired lawyer never returned my calls. Even Mr. Collins' hints led me to closed doors. I began to wonder if I had the strength to see it through. But then one night, Daniel spread the papers across the table, arranging them like puzzle pieces. "Look," he said. "Individually, these might not hold. But together? It paints a picture no one can ignore." I stared at the papers. My grandmother's shaky amendment, the property transfer, the overheard conversations, the note from Mr. Collins. It was messy, imperfect, but it was a story. My story. For years, my parents had rewritten me out of the narrative. But now, for the first time, I held the pen. And I knew exactly where the truth needed to be revealed. Family reunions had always been staged like theater in my parents' home. Long tables, polished silver, laughter pitched just loud enough to suggest harmony. That year's gathering was no different. Strings of fairy lights glowed across the garden. The smell of roasted lamb carried on the air. I arrived with Daniel, folder in hand. My heart thudded, not with fear, but with a steady resolve. For once, I wasn't here to play my part. Michael was already at the center of it all, glass in hand, recounting some story from work while my parents beamed, their faces lit with pride. The same pride I'd longed for and never received. I waited until the plates were cleared, until conversation lulled into that fragile quiet where truths could land. Then I set the folder on the table with a soft thud. I need to talk, I said. My voice didn't waver. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me. My mother's smile froze. My father's fork clinked against his plate. Michael smirked, as if already bored. I've spent months looking into Grandma's estate, I began. I pulled out the first photocopy, the original will, my name clearly marked. She left me something. You all knew that. My mother's lips parted, but I pressed on, laying down the next page. The amendment with Michael's name. And then this appeared. Signed during a time when she could barely lift a pen. A flicker of unease crossed my father's face. I continued, sliding out property records. Then there's the house. Quietly transferred into Michael's name. No mention of it to me. Even though I'm your daughter too. The table was silent now. Every paper laid out like stepping stones across a river of lies. My hands no longer trembled. Michael leaned back, forcing a laugh. This is ridiculous. You're making something out of nothing. Daniel's voice cut through, calm and sharp. It's not nothing. These are official documents. They tell a story. My mother's face hardened. We did what was best for the family. For the family. I repeated, my throat tight. Or for Michael. Because from where I stand, it looks like you decided my place was outside the circle. You erased me. Her jaw clenched. My father looked down at his hands. Michael's smirk faltered. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply let the truth sit there, undeniable, while the silence grew heavy around us. Finally, my father spoke, his voice low. We thought you didn't need it. You had Daniel. You had your job. Michael, he was struggling. I stared at him, stunned by the simplicity of the excuse. As if my worth could be weighed against convenience. You decided that for me, I said quietly. Grandma chose me, and you took that choice away. You've been taking choices from me my whole life. No one answered. The fairy lights flickered. Somewhere, a neighbor's dog barked. The stage of harmony had crumbled, leaving only raw silence. I gathered the papers back into the folder, each one sliding neatly into place. I'm done being invisible, I said. If you can't see me as part of this family, then at least the truth will. I stood, Daniel rising beside me. For once, I didn't look back for approval. As we walked out, I heard my mother's voice, sharp, trembling. What are you going to do with those papers? I turned at the doorway. Whatever it takes to make sure Grandma's voice is heard, even if it's the last thing I ever do for her. Her face drained of color. Michael shifted in his chair, suddenly restless. My father pressed a hand to his forehead, and I left them there, the glow of fairy lights casting long, distorted shadows across their perfect garden. The truth was no longer buried. The drive home was quiet but not heavy. Daniel's hand rested on mine, warm and steady against the steering wheel. The hum of the tires on the road was almost soothing, a kind of rhythm that let my racing thoughts unwind. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like I had to fold myself into a polite silence. The truth had been spoken, laid bare under fairy lights and polished silverware. And though it hadn't brought applause or apologies, it had changed something in me. At home, I set the folder on the dining table and just stared at it. Those papers, photocopies, records, signatures, looked so ordinary. Thin sheets of paper. But they had carried the weight of decades of silence. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. You did it, he murmured. I didn't win, I said, surprising myself with how flat my voice sounded. He shook his head. That wasn't about winning. That was about finally being heard. They can't pretend anymore. I leaned back into him, closing my eyes. The exhaustion hit then, not the kind that sleep cures, but the kind that comes after carrying something too heavy for too long. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the glow of the street lamp slipping through the curtains. My mind replayed their faces. My mother's frozen smile. My father's bowed head. Michael's smirk collapsing. None of them had said they were sorry. None of them had tried to stop me as I walked away. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it also clarified something. Their silence wasn't my burden anymore. The next morning, I went for a walk. The air was crisp, tinged with the faint scent of dew on grass. Children's voices echoed from a nearby park, and the sound of birdsong filled the spaces in between. For years, I had been walking with my gaze lowered, afraid of drawing too much attention, afraid of being too loud, too visible. That morning, I lifted my head. I passed a neighbor who nodded at me, her dog tugging at the leash. I smiled back, an actual smile, not the strained mask I wore at family dinners. Back home, I opened the folder again, not to fuel anger, but to honor truth. I placed a copy of Grandma's will in a separate envelope. I wrote her name on the front in careful handwriting. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about preserving her voice, the one they had tried to erase along with mine. Later, I sat at my desk by the window, pen in hand. For years, I had been teaching others how to find meaning in stories, how to hear voices between the lines. Now I began writing my own. Not for publication, not for recognition. Just for me. The words came slowly at first, then steadier, like water finally breaking through a dam. I wrote about the house with its chipped counters and scuffed walls, about mornings with coffee and silence, about a woman who spent too many years doubting her worth. I wrote about betrayal, but also about choice, how standing up didn't mean shouting louder, but refusing to shrink. Daniel found me there hours later, pen still moving across the page. He didn't interrupt. He just set a fresh cup of coffee beside me, kissed the top of my head, and left me to it. By evening, my hand ached, but my heart felt lighter. I looked out the window. The sky was streaked in orange and pink, the kind of sunset that makes you pause even if you've seen 1,000 before. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone else to give me permission. The shift was quiet, almost unremarkable from the outside. But inside, it felt like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. The family might never see me the way I once hoped. They might cling to their excuses, their silence. But I no longer needed their version of love to define me. I had spoken the truth. And that was enough. It has been weeks since that night, but sometimes I still hear Daniel's whisper in the car. Turn the car around. Now. I thought he was saving us from a wrong turn, a deer in the road, maybe even a storm we hadn't seen coming. I didn't know he was saving me from something much heavier, the weight of pretending one more time. I've replayed the reunion in my mind more times than I'd like to admit. The table, the laughter that cracked too easily, the silence that followed my words. It no longer feels like a wound, though. It feels like a scar. And scars, I've learned, aren't just marks of pain, they're proof of survival. Some mornings, I sit at the kitchen table with my coffee and look at the folder tucked neatly on the shelf. I don't open it anymore. I don't need to. Knowing the truth is enough. The papers are no longer weapons or shields. They're simply records. Evidence of what was hidden. And proof that silence can be broken. When I think of my parents now, I don't imagine their faces at the table. I think of my grandmother's voice, soft and steady, telling me as a child, always stand tall, even if your knees shake. I didn't understand it then. I do now. There's a tree at the end of our street, tall, with roots breaking through the sidewalk. I pass it every day on my walks. It leans slightly, crooked from years of storms and wind, but it still stands. Sometimes I stop and press my hand against its bark. It reminds me that strength isn't about being unbroken. It's about standing, even when you've been bent. I don't know if I'll ever see my family the same way again. I don't know if they'll ever see me at all. But I know this. I'm no longer waiting for their version of love to define me. I have my own. The truth is out there, like sunlight pushing through blinds in the morning, unavoidable, steady, real. And just like sunlight, it doesn't ask for permission to shine.